I go by they, them pronouns.
Okay, and closing Gov.
Hi, Gil speaking first. Here they, please. Asaf speaking second. No preference.
And closing up.
Hi, Kevin Hamel speaking first. No preference. Thank you.
And Jackson at second, also no preference. Thanks very much.
All right, wonderful. In which case, let's get cracking. PM.
You just called me or I missed it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. I wasn't sure I heard correctly. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Great. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. After decades of taking money from Catalonia and spend it on other people that they don't feel a part with, after ignoring the referendum of trying to get independence and push them away and tell them that it was illegal, and after imprisoning their own people by telling them that they are criminals, even though in the end they free them, but in the process they literally put them on jail and arrest, we think that the Catalonia is just unlikely to give up, and the existence of Catalonia as a part of Spain is currently at risk, and we have to deal with it. We need to think that Spain's main interest is to stop the escalation, and because what they are doing in the status quo is just not enough. We're going to have two arguments in opening government. A, why just economically economics are the most important thing for Spain in the status quo. Therefore, this is the main metric in the debate. And secondly, why we get much more stability between Catalonia and cooperation between Catalonia and Spain, and therefore gain much more economical benefits in the long term. Before I do that, one point of mechanism, one framing. First mechanism, by saying we're going to make them chartered a regime, it means we're going to have fixed price that they are paying. It's going to be a percentage of their GDP. It's not a fixed price like a specific number. It is a specific percentage of the GDP that will come in agreement with them they're paying each year. Secondly, we think that the beginning price is going to be according to what they are pretty much spending today. We think that this is the sporting start. We think it is likely to be so because we just think that first it's the negotiation. They're not just going to give up all of their money, and we're going to analyze why Catalonians are still going to agree with that. And secondly, just what happens in the Basque and in the other places. We think it's going to be a similar mechanism here. Now, the main point of framing I have here is we think that we need to notice that Catalonia is already the main commerce area in Spain with the Basque and these areas. We think that therefore the data that is important here is where the government can actually spend money in developing other areas, building infrastructures, building roads, giving subsidies to places which we're going to analyze, and not where the commerce is because it's already max in these areas. Therefore, this is just not the important question. Let's start with economics is the most important thing in the debate. First, crisis of COVID-19. We just think that there's huge economical crisis in Europe, specifically in Spain. We think that just need taxes in order to have the spendings of the government they need and to cover the debt that they had even before COVID-19, specifically now even much more. Secondly, but now specifically to Spain, just think that even before COVID, they had 20% of unemployment. We think that it's a huge problem in Spain where the population is getting older each year and they can't deal with the pensions to pay for these people. I think it's extremely important for them, A, to have money to pay pensions to people in order for them not to be old and hungry, but also build infrastructures and build things in order to have more jobs and supply jobs to the people. But third of all, just to think they have dense economically, meaning that the most of economic is only on the cities. They need a lot of spending in order to make it move outside of the cities to the countryside. It's things like infrastructure, like subsidies, as I said in the framing. We think that now they're totally dependent on these areas. Therefore, it's crucial for them to keep them spending, giving them their money, and then have the ability to develop other states. We think that everything in the debate is just dependent on this economics because everything we want to do depends on us having budget and political power to do. And also there's tons of damages that are more severe damages in the debate here. If we have this 20% of unemployment, specifically elderly, which is just horrible. Why we think that it has. And now we get much more cooperation with Catalonians in the South. Moving to my second argument. We think that first characterization, we think that Catalonians are extremely angry today, as I said in framing, because of the referendum that it was illegal, because they locked their own people, because they're in the crisis. Now they feel much more every spending that the government do on others and not on themselves. Then they feel the loss of control that they had, that they now can control their life. Now they need things in the crisis and the government doesn't supply. Now what we think in a comparative, it is changing, even if it's the same amount of money we're taking as a fixed price, comparing to directly collecting the money taxes from them, we think it is going to calm significantly the Catalans down. They're going to cooperate much more. First mechanism is the control over the life and autonomy. Because we think in the status quo, we think the rich pay much more than the poor. See, it happens in every country in the world. The only fact that we are paying more is not the thing that makes them angry. We see it happens even in the most capitalist, liberal countries in the world. It still happens. It's something that people can deal with. But the thing that we think that they can do is them having no control but what the money spending to do. We think that they feel that they are a minority. Their power is not strong enough in the Spanish political in order for them to actually change things for what is important for them. We think that therefore the Spanish government is not spending more money on them on crisis and do things that they need specifically in Barcelona, in Catalonia, and in their places in order to improve their life. I think that this feeling of lack of control is something that is making them crazy and make them angry. This is why they want independence, even though they are a small place and they are a part of Spain for long years. I think in a comparative, now when a chartered autonomy, just think the money goes directly to their own autonomy, directly to their representative that now can just benefit policies that are good for these people. If we think that it's going to just do policies that are good for people, make them calmer, but also secondly, just even if it's exactly the same policies, now they feel they're under control. They feel they can change the future. They feel they can actually do things that their tax money is doing things for Catalonians, which already makes them feel much better, even if it's the same amount of money it was before. The second mechanism is the fact that psychological way of how we're comparing ourselves to others. We think that humans always calculate what is their situation comparing to others. We think that there's no net good. If my situation is objectively good or bad, the only way for me to get a signal to know if I'm in a good or bad situation is compare myself to other places. We think it is even worse when they have this psychological mechanism that you always see others and see the positive things for them because we are jealous of them. They think that they see the Basque in the north and see that they are prospering. They have much better treatment with the state. We think in Spanish state. We think that they are jealous of them and always compare themselves and feel that it's horrible situations for them. If I continue to talk about it.
So if your model is to take the same amount of money as you're getting from tax, how are you suddenly able to solve all of the economic problems that you have in the status quo?
I'm going to get to it. So therefore, just think that when comparing goes down, they're just suffering so much. Therefore, when we take it off and they're similar as Basque, they're not going to be against. Why I think it is extremely important in getting more money? Because we think that once they are trying to get independence, right, all this hatred and non-cooperation exists, we think few things happen. First of all, just think that the collection of taxes is much lower for Catalonians as a whole. Because we think it's extremely easy to hide taxes. I can do transactions without writing it down in my machine. Like specifically when we're talking about transit prices and confidence, I think it's very easy to work when I'm under lockdown and I'm not allowed to work, but now I work in a black market without giving my money to the government. I think that now this is exactly the things that happen in Catalonia, and because they feel that I can trust, but when they know that the money goes directly to them, they control the money. I think it's much more likely that they're going to pay much more percentage of the taxes. And know that even in the best countries involved, it's almost like 60% of the taxes, only 60% of the taxes are collected in the first place. But secondly, just think that they need to spend a lot of money to calm these people down. I think it's police forces that try to calm down the protests. We think it's budgets to give to Catalonia to calm them down, but it is not enough because they're not controlled. All these spendings of money just not happening in the cooperative because they are much more cooperative for these reasons. Please propose.
Alrighty, leader of op.
Yeah, I'm just going to get some water. Yeah. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Look, I think that OG is very uncomparative in space. What I'm going to do is explain first why not all Catalonians are mad and actually explain the tipping point. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why you're more likely to have secession on their side of the house by talking about internal and external politics in these regions. Secondly, I'm going to also explain why it's principally unfair to do this. And basically, why on our side you basically have much less being comparative and then some impact. Okay, why are not all Catalonians actually mad? Two major reasons. Know that on the second day of the referendum, you had a huge number of people going to the polls and actually saying, no, we want want to stay with Spain. That's to say, there's also a huge majority of people who actually want to stay within Spain. We also know that this referendum was years ago, and now is most likely already to some extent outside of the public consciousness. But note, secondly, what is inside the public consciousness is COVID. Note that Catalonia, specifically Barcelona, in which the majority of people in Catalonia live in, is hugely dependent on the tourism sector for its economy. Due to COVID, that was basically burned down because they had no ability to actually get people in there. Therefore, they had huge help from the government to actually get money. Therefore, they actively don't really hate the government right now, simply because of the fact that they had huge help from the COVID era that they needed. Therefore, they have huge dependence on them, and therefore you don't see that there are huge number of people mad. I think that the majority of people actually are fine with staying in. I think that actually on your side of the house, you're going to get much worse. Okay, why are you much more likely to get succession there at the house? So let's look at how this is going to influence the politics inside the region. So note at the moment you're going to give them their own right to make these decisions, and it change the political agenda of these states for two major reasons. First, note that discussions surrounding taxes and what you're going to do on a local level, e.g. inside Barcelona, but also on a regional level, are now going to be completely about how are we going to make this better for us. Let's say, how are we going to develop our own sectors the best? What do we want and what do we care about the most? Therefore, you're going to have the whole inside region majority focused on the inside of Catalonia. Note that specifically that also then leads to your inability to actually talk about other subjects surrounding it, e.g. that you don't talk about maybe needing to live in because you basically have a stable amount you're going to give in. But secondly, also know that you're basically now giving them more autonomy in general. That's to say, at the moment you're going to give them more autonomy surrounding taxes, then they already see that lobbying and putting these pressures to become more independent is working. That's to say, these people are now more likely to even push for more because they already see that the government is willing to take into account, even if they are going to, for example, have major payments that they're going to give during COVID crisis. But also thirdly, note that basically people already are going to then feel that they are more autonomous, but also on the long term, when you talk about, for example, Catalonia in general or the public consciousness, then you're already going to teach your children that you are more independent already, that you already are going to have discussions surrounding just Catalonia. Therefore, also on the long term, you're much more likely to have people who really just believe that they really just identify with just being Catalonian over being Spain as a whole. Therefore, you have also on the long term way more likeliness to have a narrative that Catalonians are very different than Spain and there's at the house. Also note in outer region, this is going to be very difficult to put through. Why is this? Note that on their side of the house, they're much more likely to going to get less money. Why is it true? Firstly, note that Catalonia will try to push as hard as they can to try and make sure that they don't actually they need to pay as much. Even if they even going to pay exactly the same amount as OG, note that still within the media, it's going to show them for pushing as hard to make it as lower. Just to say that to see that Catalonia is actively working against their interest to make this as low as possible. But also secondly, note that the majority of the economy of Catalonia, because it's majority dependent on Barcelona, because it has a huge amount of population there, is also dependent on specifically tourism. That is to say that Barcelona at the moment is going to do well, is going to make a huge amount of money. Basically, at that point, then you're going to see, well, because it's always fluxing, then they're going to see, well, now they're not paying as much as they maybe should have. We also know that it works on the other side, right? That means that inside Catalonia, at the moment, tourism is down or tourism is bad. You're basically going to feel like now they're going to need to pay the same amount of money, even though tourism is down. Therefore, you're going to, on both sides of the house, whether it's going to be good or a bad year, you're basically going to have more tensions rising due to the simple fact that you don't take into account how big the economy is going, because simply the fact that the Catalonian economy is very fluctuating, not just because of its economy, but also because of its dependence on its harbors, but also because it's going to have very much difficulty with, for example, the competing of sub-Saharan nations who are now trying to get in the same markets, basically textile industry, etc. Therefore, they are more difficult. Thirdly, note that if in crisis, these other nations or other states within Spain feel like they can't rely on Catalonia and the huge amount of money because it's already been autonomous. That's to say, it already is difficult to, for example, get more money from that area to try and start funding, for example, education system, infrastructure, or just get less people homeless on their side of the house. Even if you have a stable income, you can make it flexible. And because of the fact that you can't make it flexible, you can't adapt to the economic and social context of the country as a whole. Therefore, you're basically also going to have on their side of the house more hate towards us. Then why is this principally unfair? Know that Barcelona, but also the state of Sicily, basically had a lot of dependency or actually able to be the major economic power due to the fact that they could use the other states. Why is this true? Three major reasons. Know that a lot of the time, previously, they were able to actually become big is because they built a ton of harbors, because they built of infrastructures. They came from other taxes, from even other states. Therefore, they've already been basically prospering from paying the previous province also paying taxes. Second, Secondly, also note that they basically sold products made by the other provinces, and they were able to actually get those cheaply because of the fact they were in the same country. That is the reason why Barcelona even became big in the Middle Ages, because of the simple fact they were able to export that because of the fact they were in a union with these other provinces. Thirdly, also note that there were major investments, for example, due to the Olympic Games, to invest in the infrastructure of Barcelona, in the hotels, in the stadiums, etc. So the majority of its economy, like for example, FC Barcelona, but also the other kind of tourism, is basically built upon the back of billions and billions of taxes paid by the other states. Meaning that they, because of the fact that they have been basically building this money upon other provinces, they should return the favor and never pay them. Okay, I'll actually take CG.
Yeah, after years of political instability, how was Pedro Sanchez successful eventually in creating a government?
Okay, basically, why you're going to be on Arts of the Lights less likely to actually have this, basically reacting to your POI. First, A, you don't get the polarization. B, you also are better to able to see the narrative. That's to say, the Spanish government is now trying to focus the narrative on patriotism, on the idea that you should help each other in these times of crisis, specifically in COVID. At the moment, you're then going to give them this autonomy, and you're unable to have that same narrative because you basically say, fuck that narrative. Thirdly, also note, basically, you're better to able to apply, for example, with the things that the European Central Bank wants to do, because of the fact that they need specific loans, because it's already been a crisis before COVID. That's to say, it needs to be able to lower certain tax on certain areas or hide them in committee or in allowance with the European Central Bank or even the IMF. It gets so far. So basically, the impact is on the downside of your house, you're going to have much more likely to get secession. Note that this is basically very important for Spanish state because it has been trying for years to keep the country stable, but also means that the moment you're going to have this rich area leave, then basically you're less likely to be able to make sure that other places are going to get better, to build the infrastructure, to better the education system, which is crumbling, but also that other regions will get less developed, will have more anger. Therefore, you can only vote OO.
Alrighty. DPM.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Great, just a glass of water. Okay, I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. We think that OO, first of all, agree with us on the fact that economics is incredibly important. Note that all of their analysis on benefits banks on economics. Therefore, that is conceded. If I show you that we get better economics on our side, we're going to win this debate. Second of all, notice that they also agree with us on the fact that they concede that it's not all Catalonians that feel this way. What does this mean? They mitigate their own case by making secession less likely on their side, which they framed as the worst possible outcome, which means that if not all Catalonians want this, it doesn't matter. Notice that this isn't in tension with our case, because Lior's claim was that the Catalonians that do behave in this way in a way that means that I need to spend resources on quieting them down, even if it's not all Catalonians that are taking to the street, even if it's not all Catalonians that are hiding taxes, even if it's not all Catalonians that are protesting, I need to spend a lot of resources to quiet them down because the amount of damage they cause is harmful. So I need to spend money on extra police force. I need to spend political capital on dealing with the issues that they're specifically raising because they're in the news and they're creating public opinion. This means that it doesn't matter that it's not all Catalonians that are fighting for this, only insofar as it mitigates OO's case, making secession less likely. Second, secession isn't likely because of Catalonians' dependency on everything that Spain does. They can't have independence without Spain agreeing to it. They can't have independence without Spain allowing tourists to go through, without allowing them to go through their ports and all of this stuff. This means that Catalonia won't secede without the agreement of Spain, which we think is just unlikely to happen. They are likely to keep fighting because they think they might achieve it, even though it's unlikely because the average Catalonian doesn't understand that, which means we're just spending resources on something that is never going to succeed and not allowing us to deal and take those both political and capital resources and try to solve unemployment and try to make the rest of the country prosper as well. The second thing I want to say is that in an answer to the POI, they concede that the current narrative within the country is one of unity and one of coming towards people. Then they assume that if I give Catalonians autonomy of this kind, that they're going to interpret it as throwing that narrative away. We think it's far more likely that they interpret it, given the current narrative, In Lior's way, as in coming towards you, saying, you know what, you want some more independence, you want to be able to do this well to some extent. Here, we're letting you take control of your own situation, and therefore you should do it. My next point is just going to be a lot about the economic incentives and why we just get a lot more economic prosperity for that region on our side. I think that this is true for several reasons. First of all, a match of incentives. Notice that there is a mismatch of incentives when we're talking about common regime specifically. Why? Because the richer I get, the more money I have to give to other people and the less I'm actively getting from other places. This means that I don't have any incentive to become more rich. I don't have any incentive to recuperate, because that means that the money I make isn't even going to me. I'm going to get the same amount of money from the regime in the first place, especially when I have to make tough decisions in order to make my economy better now. I am less likely to do that when my incentives don't line up with that. On the other side, when I have the second kind of autonomous whatever, that I have an incentive to be better because I'm increasing the pie for everyone. My gain doesn't mean someone else. If I gain more, I'm not just losing those profits. I am gaining directly from them, even if I'm giving some of them away. That means I have far more incentive to be financially prosperous. Second, let's talk about what kind of decisions we are able to make. And here I think we have two mechanisms. First of all, the kind of knowledge and whether or not we're making the best decisions for the reason in the first place. We think that when Spain as a whole needs to make decisions for so many regions, and especially Catalonia, which is an intricate region because they have different industries and different things that they're doing, and you have to be able to make those decisions. Access to knowledge and direct knowledge is something that's important to have to make the best decisions. We think that the local people and local leaders are going to be much better able to make those decisions because they have people who are cooperating with them, giving them information, that don't view them as enemies, so they're not hiding things from them. They have people from the ground directly talking to them. They have the time to speak to many people from many different industries because they're only making decisions for one region and not for many regions. This means that they're likely to make A, better decisions, but B, more fast decisions that will allow both faster prosperity and faster recovery if that is what you need. We just think that is a better situation to have. Second, we just think ability to enact good but less popular policy. We think that when the policies are coming from the Spanish government, even if they will be eventually good for your region, you're far more likely to push back against them because you don't trust that government. You're likely to spend a lot more time criticizing that government because you as a local politician, if the people around you view them as an enemy, you're more likely to criticize. And even if it's a good policy, if you agree to it, you're viewed as weak and caving into the oppressor. So you're not going to be able to do that. On the comparative, when you're the one making those decisions, even if it's the exact same policy, you're not likely to push back and you're likely to drive for it because you're the one who's making that decision. In addition, we think the people are more likely to engage with those decisions that you need to be making because they trust you, they know you, you represent them both ideologically and identity. So they're not likely to push back against the government as much, and they're likely to cooperate even if they have to take a hit for the long run because it speaks to their identity and patriotism. This allows them to make the tough decisions that will allow recovery and allow the economy to prosper more. Before I continue, I'll take opening.
About tax policies, how do you think it's actually going to matter what kind of decisions we make, given that it's about how much tax do we give and what's kind of...
What do you mean? Which industry I'm taxing how much? What industries I'm giving tax breaks to? What I'm prioritizing? What I'm subsidizing? All of those things are difficult policies that decide how much money I'm getting and from who and how I'm distributing it. That is exactly where I get to prioritize and I get support from different people and how that translates into actual policy. Why do we think that's and also the kind of cooperation we get from the Catalonian government and our government changes, because if they always lose, no matter if I'm making them richer, because I'm just going to take more money from them and give it to other places, that's a different incentive than if they get richer, we all get richer. And we just think those line up. What is the bottom line of this? More prosperity means better for everyone. Second, more prosperous relations means less pushback and means you can strengthen ties in other ways that make secession less likely. You can build more infrastructure because you have more money. You can solve widespread unemployment and become more popular. You can take active steps to create more infrastructure in that area and make sure they're dependent on you, which means you're less likely to get pushback. We think that this is the most crucial thing. Why is this true? First of all, money is a prerequisite for anything else, as we already described. Anyone who wants to talk about different impacts will still be dependent on that analysis. Second, most directly impacted by the motion, because we showed you why secession and loss of power is unlikely and stability is solved by economics and how economics translates into that. Third, we think that if you have you want to do principled things and right by your country, having more resources to do that allows you to do that. And lastly, we show you why you're more likely to spend and stay in power because you can deal with other problems and get support and create more dependency. For those reasons, please propose.
Okay. CLO.
Am I audible like this?
Yes.
Ah, great. Real brief before I start. Mom, if you're watching, sorry if I speak too fast again. That being said, starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, opening government wants you to buy that at the moment you give a region all the harms of being in a state without any benefits of being in a state. And at the same time, all harms of being a separate state without any benefits of being a separate state. I think you found the exact most terrible outcome that you can possibly give to these people. What I'm going to do is 2 points of extraneous rebuttal that I think deal with the large extent of economic prosperity, then taking at the best where we get more risk of succession. If I have time left, something on popularity of the government and the weighing. Cool, real brief on the economic prosperity. I think to a large extent, the case of OG is contingent upon this. They say, yeah, but it is about who makes the better decisions, who can actually make them prosper. 2 responses. Firstly, I already point out in the POI, Luke, this is about taxes. This is not this is not rocket science. Tamar responds to it by saying, yeah, but tax breaks to companies are quite important, and you need to make this decision over time. Luke, at the moment that they can figure this out in 15 minutes, I think that the Spanish government can do so as well. I don't think that Sanchez is a very stupid individual that is like, I don't have the knowledge on what is going to be the best kind of way to actually tax these companies in order to make the most money. I think he likely has a very similar incentives towards Catalonia, because also the amount of money that they make is directly flowing to that government. Unclear from opening government why this is different. Secondly, on buy-in for those policies, I don't think OG proves to you the tipping point why an individual that makes them is so important ultimately in establishing the outcome. Note that all these decisions, 1, are still likely to cost money, 2, limit the freedom. I think there's a bunch of other narratives that take place in it. Let's talk about succession and economy and directly clashing this with OG. So we agree that they're probably interested into Spain, that they want to prevent succession because opening government already explains why you think money is important and that money in itself. Why we think that risk is large under their side of the house. So firstly, why do we think it's very limited currently, and it's probably under our side of the house very little chance that the secession is going to be happening? So firstly, Piotr already points out to you, even after the referendum of 2015, they did not leave. Why? Because they felt like we probably are not going to stand a chance. The international community doesn't really recognize us with the reason that Catalonia was semi-autonomous. That is to say, they did not have an organized government. Rajoy back then could simply control the narrative in the same way Sanchez could do now. Opening government then says, but they're not going to pay taxes. Know that Rajoy literally came to there with guns. We think that Sanchez, at the moment that he came into power, came on a better ground with them. But know that they are still very holding back at the moment that Sanchez already made quite good deals with them at the moment that he wanted to start on a different ground than Rajoy did before him. But we think that neither side therefore wants to again, and therefore there's not much meddling. Opening government then says, but cooperation is super important, and that's unlikely to happening, and it's going to be better under their side. Look, at the moment, that cooperation is benefiting both sides. Both sides will trade with each other nonetheless. At the moment, it's not benefiting one of the entities. I think they're very unlikely to start trading. This is the reason why the Netherlands doesn't have trade with Luxembourg, for example, because we cannot offer each other that much, but still trade with Gulf states despite not liking them that much. We simply don't care for that. What is going to change under opening government side? I think the closing up is already correct in saying you still pay a bunch of money. But here's the nuance. I think at that point, the response that Lior gives is that you can claim more autonomy. But know that the autonomy is very limited. Why? Firstly, know that you are still part of a bigger entity and still part of a bigger national identity. But secondly, and crucially, you're going to have all the you want to see the benefits of actually being autonomous. That falls away at the moment that you're simply are going to keep paying money gradually for each and every month. That is to say, I think that at the moment that they talk about there's no incentive for economic flourishing, it's symmetric on their side simply because Lior models that it's going to be a percentage of the of your GDP. I don't think that OG can have the cake and eat it too. But why do we think it's likelier than that they're going to be wanting more? Look, they have all the harms of staying in Spain without any benefit. A lot of the things you could have done if you were independent, you can do now. That is basically the difference between being an independent state and being under the model of opening government is not going to matter that much. The thing that matters, though, is that you're going to have to pay a huge amount of money to your state. Things that you would have liked to spend on other things. Insert the high school argument, oh, healthcare and education, we found it's very important. I think this is true for the Catalan government. But why do we then think that is gonna that is gonna change? Because we tell you, look, that means that under our side we are currently seeing that they are not having the incentive to. However, under their side, they can actually have time to build up their buffers and find allies. They're going to, at the moment that we buy Tamar's analysis, that they're going to be so much more economically flourishing. Therefore, we say that only makes them more powerful in this system. What is it going to look like? One, it means that they can actually grow a diplomatic system. Two, it means that they can actually organize their governments. They can do taxes, they can build communications, they can identity building, they can do trade deals with certain countries to actually gain legitimacy on the international playing ground and stand more strong at the moment that they want to succeed. We think that therefore we prove to you that one, they want to succeed, B, they're able to succeed. Because this is going to not be seen as something that opening government tells to you, yeah, it's a very good way to give in and we're going to like them very much. No, it's a terrible hand giving in. It is, we wanted to have more autonomy, but we're not getting that, and we have to cope with this shit now. They're probably not going to like it. This is not going to lead to gratitude. They will just be seen as fuck this. Before I'm going to go on, Tamar.
Yeah, so given our explanation on why Spain having more funds means they're more able to solve problems, that's going to strengthen the camp that you agree already exists in why staying within Spain and not going autonomous is better for them. I think that at best you're showing symmetrical powers, but we actually think that the analysis falls on our side given lack of engagement.
No, I think we firstly I engage with this already, but we secondly say, look, there are benefits from trading with Spain. It's just unclear why you have to stay then in Spain to have access to these benefits at the moment that you are basically in the same situation, but you have to pay a buttload of money to them. I don't see any benefit for Catalonia in that. OG then says, but yeah, you compare yourself to others. Yeah, sure, the grass may be green on the other side, but desires are infinite. You're likely to see the arm. That doesn't mean that Catalonia is going to do overnight to the secession. However, it leads to a couple of things. They can grow their economy, they can organize their government, and they can actually grow allies without Sanchez controlling the narrative. How do we weigh this to opening government? We think that sure, opening government is able then to spend less resources on the police to actually condemn this. However, they simply lose all the access to the knowledge of what is currently happening, and we think that is then ultimately much worse because you actually lose the possibility to monitor. We think that Piotr gives you then lots of analysis on why other states are not going to like it. That's going to harm the economy of Spain as a whole, but it's going to harm the economy of Catalonia at the moment that they comply. What we think is they probably are now getting the chance to actually opt out of the system, but also the intrinsic desire of opting out of the system is only going to be increasing a lot. We think that ultimately harms the economy of Spain, defeating opening government on their metric. I'm very proud to oppose.
Okay, member of Gov.
Hi. All right. Three, two, one. Here's how we're going to beat our opening half. Firstly, we're going to describe the actual government of Spain and its interest and why this is so crucial to them. And then why this stabilizes this government that on the comparative is likely to fall apart and to lose political support and political power on next. And then finally, why on the long term, it's actually hugely important and beneficial to the Spanish economy as a whole. Before that, 2 points of external rebuttal. Tell us, Barcelona and Catalonia only get the economic damages on OG's model. It might be true on the very, very short term, like even the first year, but in a slightly longer term to that, they will be able to use all that different tax usage, all the control of the tax code that they now have to change the situation to their own betterment, to increase their own economy, to have a better situation there. We don't think that this is only harms. Always say we get only the harms of having a state. That's not even true in the first place, because you don't get the harms of running a state on your own. You don't have to maintain an army. You don't. If you secede, you get out of. You maintain a membership in the EU if you don't secede. We think these are huge benefits to staying within Spain. So we don't think the secession is necessarily more likely on their side. Actually, we don't think the secession is that likely in the first place on either side, because it's such a complicated cultural, legal, constitutional, EU interaction matter that we think that the likelihood on both sides of it is actually fairly small in this debate. That is not true for the interest of the government and a collapse of that government, which we think is likely. Who is that government? That government is Pedro Sanchez and his Socialist Party, with the combination of the Basque and the Catalonia parties. Why is that true? Because the PP, their major right-wing rivals, refused for years to cooperate with them to create a unity government that caused repeated elections over and over and over until they had no choice, Pedro Sanchez's party, to join hands with the Basque Catalonians at the background of this vote of independence. They had to give them this unique political power at the time to have a stabilized political government. The interest of this government is to be stable, like to have a full term of office that the government will not collapse. And for the specific Catalonian party, they have the mandate and they need to improve the lives of specifically the people who brought into power their Catalonian citizens. Why we think that if we take this motion, this stabilizes the government, therefore is massively in their incentives. Note that this is a narrative victory, and therefore at the strongest case of opposition, even if it doesn't help them necessarily short-term economically, it's still very important for that stability. For the Catalonian party, this is a unique opportunity to change the situation for their best. They haven't been in power for years before that because nobody wanted to cooperate with them. This is their biggest political gain in years, and therefore they really, really want to get that. They really want to get more autonomy, more power for their citizens, and failing that will require a large political backlash from their side, likely taking apart the government in this period. The comparative here is to strengthen the narrative of exploitation and oppression. Even when we're the government, we can succeed to sway the wings on our side. So leaving that government and strengthening independent voters, even if it doesn't actually happen, but going away from the government, we think is so much likelier here. For Sanchez and the rest of the government, that is political. That is horrifying politically, right? Because they can't keep the country safe. They can't keep their government together, even at the time of crisis, to protect all their citizens. Therefore, they are very, very likely to lose popular support. They're very likely to lose political power and political capital at the outset, and on the long term, lose out to their political rivals. They need to stabilize the government. They need to give the Catalonians some straw that they can cling onto and to say, we got that. When we have power, we are able to improve our lives. We should stay in power and keep this government stable. Why is this economic interest the deciding factor for the Catalonians? Because that was the main issue in their referendum in the first place, where the result was almost 50-50 if you take into account the people who actually voted. It represents the issue of their exploitation. It's a measurable, tangible metric that shows that they lose out by being a part of the Spanish polity. And in a region that is so dependent on international trade and tourism, control of capital gains, control of tariffs, control of corporate tax rates, that's the major part of control of their lives that OG start to point out to. That's how that actually plays out in the world. And also like the day-to-day influence of it's the economy stupid, of whether or not they have a job or not, whether or not they can support their children. That's the major truth. Also, that note that it's also true for the Catalonians that don't support secession. That is the interest of all Catalonians to have more control of their lives. So not getting that is a slap to their faces in the thing that is more important to them, especially at the background of Corona that OG point to, that they were hit the strongest. Before I continue, closing.
So there are 17 autonomous regions within Spain, of which Basque and Catalonia are two of the smallest and least popular. What are the odds that they are now magically in government with the Socialist Party at this specific time in history?
they got to that power because the government failed to construct in any other way. They need to use the power that they have right now. If they don't do it, they don't have any other chance, and they slap their constituents in the face. They lose all reasonable mandate. They will lose power as well, and rightfully so. In the long term, why that help the Spanish economy at large? Because Barcelona mainly and Catalonia is a huge source of income for that economy, but it was mostly harmed in these past two major crises, and especially in the past year and some. What happens now? When you have a control of capital gains, when you have a control of corporate tax rates, you can bring back in companies and foreign investments from strong countries in the area, like France, like Italy, that are close geographically, and in some cases also linguistically, they have ties there. It strengthens the infrastructure of production and supply chains of that, and therefore you have a strong economy, and enables the government to have a unique control of the influence on tourism and the infrastructure of tourism to grow that economy again, to make that region more attractive to tourists again. That means that you control the economic crisis and move more money. Why does that overtake the money that the rest of Spain loses out from taxes? Because that's the area that is strongest economically. That's a huge gain from VAT taxes from each and every transaction. Like the gain of that is in the billions, because that's the main area of trade in the day-to-day life. It's an area that is used as a gateway for trade with the rest of Spain. So bringing more foreign investment there trickles down into the rest of Spain and gives them gains that they wouldn't have otherwise. And the mechanism they get from all of that means that the loss isn't that huge in the first place. For all these reasons, we think that's best for everyone, and we're very proud to propose.
All right. Member vote.
Okay, thanks very much. Can I check my audible?
Yep.
Lit. Thank you very much. Okay. 3, 2, 1. I'm going to forward two claims. Firstly, that this is an issue around, so the coalition party that exists under the status quo is predominantly left-wing, the Demos and the Socialist Party, and that any coalition is ultimately fragile, and this is too great a risk. The second claim I'm going to forward is that ultimately there is our perceived among the broader populace among Spain, this would be deeply unpopular by reference to its comparison to the Basque region, which was dominated by terrorism. And the recent release of the leaders that OG mentions mean that there's likely to be a perceived threat among the Spanish people of recurrent waste of that funds. But firstly, some recharacterization, which I think is essential, because CG really tries to have their cake and eat it, but it's genuinely insane. Like, panel, think about it for 2 seconds. What are the odds that the Catalan parties and the Basque parties are the ones that happen to be at the national level in government? Next to none. The reason being, firstly, Spain has a multi-tiered system. There's regional parties and regional politics, and then there are upper parties and elite politics, 5 national parties to be precise. They tend to be separate from the regional parties for 2 reasons. One, to avoid like large-scale controversy, because they want to specifically operate in a national stage and have control over multiple regions, so don't want to alienate them against each other. 2, because it's much harder to dominate local interests when there are more individuals that are bound into those party matrices, i.e. individuals that more people know, or people that are specifically from the area, meaning there's a greater influx at the regional level. They tend not to be able to go nationally because they're regionally concentrated and integrated. The second and most obvious observation I would have here is that the regions that they identify, the Basque region and the Catalonian region, are not popular among the majority of the Spanish people for 2 fairly obvious reasons. Firstly, the Basque region was one that was dominated by terrorism, i.e. they killed a large number of Spanish people over the vast majority of their history. This is something that Spanish people overweight. 1, because a large number of people had people proximate to them die, but 2, people tend to overweight things they're afraid of, precisely because of the fact that even if it's not like a real threat, the fact that it could damage them or someone close to them means that it seems massive and proximate. Like, i.e. more people are afraid of terrorism than there are of cows, despite the fact that cows die every year. The second thing is Catalonia launched a massive independence movement, i.e. like they literally in it, their leaders were arrested, they challenged Spanish hegemony, they insulted the government and the Spanish people and identity and claimed that they were distinct and separate from it. This riled up a large number of Spanish people insofar as all parties within Spain uniquely criticized this and claimed this was an attack on Spanish sovereignty that was repeatedly played throughout the media. And this meant that a large number of individuals within Spain were both alienated from this, but feared Catalonia because the second and last independence movement they were aware of of was the Basque one, and they feared it going into that large scale of terrorism again. So the majority of the Spanish populace are not okay with it. What then is the real coalition, and how does that actually operate? It is Podemos and the socialist government. The reason for that is because the vast majority of Spanish people, as has been noted, are experiencing things like COVID, have gone through the 2008 financial crisis, which meant that for a short period of time, the proximate concern of the vast majority of Spanish people was redistribution, meaning that a larger number, not everyone, because there's still some degree of like right-wing individuals or individuals that view an alternative solutions, voted for two left-wing parties that now persist in a broadly fragile coalition. Why is this fragile under the status quo? For three fairly obvious reasons. One, just internally, the fact that it's really, really damaging within a coalition, because one party always has an incentive or potential incentive to call you out if you defect from them, meaning that you tend not to take that many risks, because one person, if they just don't turn up to vote, if they like publicly criticize you, can collapse an entire coalition. Secondly, because both of them are left-wing, this introduces a new level of competition. The reason being, one is far left, one is centre-left, meaning that both are vying for the same electoral base over the long term, because coalitions aren't eternal, meaning that if one defects from working class policies, that means that you're likely to lose the working class going forward, and they'll favour the one that they've perceived in the coalition as better for them. The reason this matters is because left-wing parties, when they want to maintain consistency, it's because they ebb and flow, specifically construct their strategies around consistently appealing to the working class, because those are the ones that are likely to have the most static interests. The third thing is that re-election is quite likely. The reason being that the Spanish election is coming up within a year or two, and they've existed within the context of COVID, meaning that these concerns are becoming increasingly more proximate as individuals prep and prepare for election. The fourth and final thing, but this amplifies all of the previous stuff, is coalitions among the public are typically considered weak, or they generally fear them, and coalitions have a much higher burden upon themselves, simply because people generally distrust politics and think that a coalition is just multiplying the number of assholes in the government in question, meaning that you really have to do a good job and be really consistent to your principles, the basis on which they voted for you, wider redistribution to Spain, to maintain power. The effect of this means that these parties just prima facie are unlikely to take this risk. If, as they've identified, the region of Barcelona will become wealthy, but this will not be redistributed to the majority of Spain, that is segregating this off. Even the perception of that is sufficient, right? And I think two things probably make this specifically worse. One, a large number of workers on the ground are likely to be amplified by unions who are vitriolically or more left-wing and more likely to call out people on the ground. These individuals will view this as specifically hateful because they often intersect with those that are most anti-Catalonian, because they tend to be dominated by individuals with Spanish nationalist sentiments, and those groups tend to have particularly large amounts of power within Spain because they've built up over decades and can rally individuals. You'll likely see things like protests, etc., etc. The second component is moderates and stuff will likely be put off by this, because right-wing political parties and stuff, even if it's not the reality that they'll lose a huge amount of investment, will call out the Spanish left-wing governments for doing this. They'll say they're being fiscally irresponsible, calling back and harking to these individuals that wasted a large amount of their money and were literally arrested for illegally funding referendums, and they'll say that this could be done much better for the rest of Spain, and this is another part of that left-wing irresponsibility. This is likely to alienate both the moderate individuals that shifted to Podemos and the socialist coalition that otherwise wanted redistribution but now don't view this party as delivering, meaning over the long term they're likely to lose more votes and are likely to be criticised repeatedly in the press. This means that all of their benefits that they outlined to like Catalonia and stuff literally does not matter, because these are national parties with national electoral incentives. Go ahead, OG.
Yeah, we explained why the stronger financial prosperity and lack of wasting resources allows us to fix damages Spain suffered from the economic crisis of more than a decade.
No,
these things threaten the stability and allow more power.
No, because the thing is that the business stuff and tax breaks that you talk about affect businesses within Catalonia. This is likely to be perceived as unfair by the rest of Spain, insofar as those tax breaks given to businesses, etc., are not ones applied universally, meaning that is a loss to everyone on net. The second component is I don't know how this fixed cost that you talk about can be the same amount that's extracted from it when you're literally giving up the vast majority of tax revenue within a state and reducing it solely to VAT. It can't exceed that for this debate to work, meaning there's probably a net loss anyway. Okay, the second thing, but this extends from the stuff that I've talked about anyway, there's likely to be perceived to be a real risk of reoccurrence of violence or the waste of this money among the Spanish people. That's likely to amplify for three reasons. Firstly, the fact that these leaders have been released from prison who were locked up precisely for the reason that they wasted a large amount of money funding a referendum are perceived as the most extreme within Spain for two reasons. Firstly, because those individuals literally called for things like violence if the referendum didn't go down, which is why they were specifically targeted, which amplifies the fears among the wider Spanish populace. Secondarily, because this money specifically is something they would likely have control over, insofar as when they re-enter Catalonia, many individuals hail them as heroes, so they're likely to get some degree of re-election among the base that supports them, which amplifies that fear among the Spanish populace further. Insofar as large numbers of individuals overreact to fear, this is an attack on the ability of that government to provide security to its people, which the median voter buys into, which they're more likely to lose seats to a much greater extent to. Oppose. Thanks.
Okay, close and go.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. Sorry, but CO are factually wrong in this debate. I'm going to prove this analytically and therefore beat them in their own extension. I'm going to talk about 3 things. How is the government created? What is the interest of this government? And then where is the economy better in the long term? So let's talk about how the government is built. Pedro Sanchez 6 months ago freed up from jail all the Catalonian leaders which were locked up. Why would he do this if this is so unpopular, as CEO described, and if they're not a part of this government? This was actually a part of their agreements when they entered the coalition parties, right? When they come up and say to you, there are local politics and national politics, they missed the trend that happened in Spain in the past few years that we analyzed. They had 4 elections in 4 years. This means that politics became more and more fragmented. The bigger parties had less and less power to actually create coalitions on their own. This created a situation where smaller parties have the ability to be kingmakers. Even if politics is on a national level, obviously there are still parties representing Catalonians, which are a big portion of the Spanish population, like about 10%. Secondly, note, this is a political crisis. This means that this gives the Pedro Sanchez legitimacy to do more extreme measures and actually enter these parties into the parliament, right? And lastly, note that they are really popular, right? CEOs say, well, most of the people hate the Basques and the Catalonians, and therefore you're going to lose the elections. First of all, again, they already did a rather extreme measure of entering these parties in the coalition, so they already lost a lot of political capital. I don't understand what the delta is. Secondly, note, there's no violence for decades. Actually, having pictures and photos of police brutality actually punching down Catalonians going to do a polling station means that people actually have a lot of sympathy to Catalonians and actually understand that there is a problem of discrimination against them from government. Not also, we have been 4 years since this referendum where Mariano Rajoy, which got against them, was really corrupt. Note moreover, without these people, there was no government. So they are sacrificing for the rest, right? Given the analysis that we get from closing opposition, how much people want socialist measures happening and stuff like that, they're willing to sacrifice other things because this is the most important thing for them. So if these parties are the only thing that is able to create a coalition and actually make successful Podemos and the Socialist Party, then this is what is necessary for doing, and people actually prefer this. So honestly, we just think there's not going to be a backlash. Note that even if they're right and they don't have like a clear majority, they still are on a razor-thin majority. They want as many parties as possible to help them pass these votes because there are a lot of moderates in Sanchez's party as well, and they won't be able to pass these policies. What is the incentive of the government? The incentive of the government is the incentive now of the Catalonian party because they want stability. Because this is the only party government they were able to create after years. There are no alternatives because they need to stay long enough in power to show that they have some successes. And the Popular Party had a coalition with other parties which just don't want to cooperate with Sanchez's party. So you had to do this. So why does this win this debate? Because this shows you that we care mostly about the taxation and not from the long term, and this beats both opening half teams. Why? First of all, this shows you that we care more about this than the economy in the long term. First of all, there's logical precedent. If you are not a PM and showing like a lot of successes in the next 2 years, then you're not going to be elected. It doesn't help you that the economy is better in the long term. Secondly, note your influence as a prime minister on the economy is really small, and the credit that you're going to get about it is really small because economics are something that is really complex, and most of the changes that you do now are going to affect in 20 years until the region is going to be more stable. So you just care about this less than actually being prime minister. This just means that without verifying that the government is stable, we beat opening half's economic clash. Why do we care less about secession? So first of all, this is a clash that we close in opening half, right? Opening opposition say a lot of people didn't want to secede in the first place, and the economy is being hurt because of tourism. Specifically note, when the government transfers a lot of money from Catalonia to other places, there's a lot of money that companies in Catalonia have much less money, much higher likelihood of collapsing during COVID. This means that a lot of anger for the government because the crisis is worse because of them, even if you were initially in the side of staying. Secondly, most people just want more money in taxes and stuff like that. This means that the amount of people that don't want to secede just goes down drastically, and then every ability for a referendum just disappears. This closes the case of where do you have more likelihood to secede, because we explain why this is the tipping point of actually flipping people to the other side, and this responds better than OG. But moreover, this explains why we can communicate this as a diplomatic step that the government had to do, and therefore people are not going to blame this by the fact that they are making secession closer, because they have actual data showing that a lot of people cared about the economy and they can further it away. So this is also something that will be solved in the long term by a future government, which will have this political crisis. And then Sanchez as well doesn't care about this as much. Before I go on,
Yeah, look, even if Catalonia won't secede, it will still keep pushing for autonomy, crippling the Spanish government's possibility to actually push policy or to change anything in Spain, because it's the major economic drive of Spain.
No. Here you missed the fact that specifically the taxation, and this is my next point, is the most important thing for these governments, right? Opening governments say there are a lot of economic stuff that are important for them because there's COVID in Europe and because money is control over their lives. But they missed that there is a larger context here, that it's not enough to say that you have control, the money is control over their life. It's really a literal day-to-day thing that people prioritize over everything else, because it's the food that they have on the table, their chance for employment, their chance to create companies and take loans. These are all things that the government controls as it has more money, and they feel that they are discriminated against, and people don't trust the government. Specifically, it's important because the party is more separatist, the one that's in the coalition, because they want this political achievement, and because this is a concrete example of exploitation by the central government. So this is where, when you get this taxation, you don't want to push up against more things, because you know that you have limited political capital, but this is a change that you can actually achieve because of the reasons that we gave you before. Lastly, we did prove that the economy also gets better on the long term, because we actually proved to you where companies are going to rise up more. For all of these reasons, TG.
Okay. Well,
Hi, am I audible?
yeah.
Great, just give me 2 seconds. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Kevin's analysis about the risk to the coalition is the most important impact in the round for a number of reasons. Firstly, at the point at which, as Kevin explained, you're very likely to lose your working class base, that is the most important group that you can lose in government. Even if we accept the blatant lie coming from CG that you have some support among the tiny population of Catalonians that exist in mainland Spain, a much bigger voter group that's far more important to you closer to election is the group of working class individuals that got you into power and have been your consistent base over time. If you lose them, that is a massive risk to you, because it's impossible to recoup those voters in any capacity, because they make up the majority of Spain, but also they are the group that is specifically most likely to vote for a left-wing party, and it's very unlikely that you are able to catch other groups and meaningfully engage with them. Secondly, as Kevin points out, you are very likely right now to prompt protests, given the degree to which there's a huge amount of unrest in Spain. Because as everyone can see from this debate, COVID has ravaged the economy, because tensions are quite high in terms of how they engage in Catalonia, because there has been a history of terrorism within the country and people don't take it lightly. When you bow down to revolutionary governments, that means that you may be facing genuine unrest within mainland Spain. Thirdly, the fact that this is likely to make the future election, which is coming up at the end of this year, incredibly contentious. No, that's a massive risk to you, because you could lose power completely, which means as a government, you no longer have the capacity to implement any of your vision or do any of the things that you care about, or you could be forced into an even even more an easy coalition, because at least right now the coalition government are ideologically aligned. There's a huge risk that more right-wing parties or central parties could come in. That's just bad, both for you as the government, but also in general in terms of trying to achieve things, because you've no agreement along what the party lines actually talk about. The second prong of our extension is to point out that there is a genuine risk of unrest in Catalonia. Opening opposition's analysis here is to say that because this is going to be bad, Catalonians will be angry about it. What Kevin specifically points out is that the leverage of power Catalonians have used throughout history is control of finances. That's how they organize the referendum, and that's how they support things like militia groups within the area. Spain has been able to temper that throughout history because they specifically control the overarching finances and can do things like just withdraw that money from Catalonia or imprison their leaders, as they did for mismanagement of funds. At the point at which you hand over far more economic control to those specific elites, that's going to be perceived as a huge risk by the voters that you care about the most, but it also just is an actual risk. So there could be a much greater degree of unrest within the area, and that could be incredibly harmful to you going forward. The responses we get to this from closing government were firstly to reiterate their claim that Catalonians are in power. One, I just compare the warrants Kevin gives you on the likelihood of why you would let a party that clearly has an incentive to do cronyism to be in complete control of the government versus the claim from closing government as to why it's likely, which is just they let the leaders out of prison, which is one thing that they ever did in relation to the Catalonians. Secondly, though, note they concede in whip that it's a very small aspect of the coalition that is Catalonians, meaning you probably care far more about appeasing the left-wing base that supports the larger parts of the coalition, which they concede exist, meaning that that's the more important thing to prioritise. The second thing to say here, though, is that the Spaniards that they say are supporting the Catalonian aspect of the party are obviously not crazy sympathetic to the idea of Catalonian secessionism because they've chosen to live in mainland Spain. So they're likely to be far more moderate and not care about this specific issue as compared to the issue of the genuine economics that they're facing on the day-to-day and the specific ideology of the party that they voted into power. The other claim they make is that you've already made concessions to Catalonia, so this won't be taken seriously. One, note that is nowhere near as large as the astronomical concession you would have to make here by giving Catalonia huge control over its finances. No, this is the premise the entire government bench relies on, because that's how they say you're going to win over Catalonians, because they will see this as a huge degree of autonomy being given to them. Secondly, you are nowhere near as close to the election as you are now. Voters will pay far more attention to this concession, the concession in the past. Thirdly, this is a cross-cutting concession, because it's not just like letting out the leaders, which only affects the Catalonian issue. You're also affecting the economy and financial issues that your voters care far more about, meaning this will be taken far more seriously. This extends over our opening in four important ways. Firstly, our analysis is just the most proximate concern of the Spanish government, because if they cannot field elections meaningfully, or if they lose control of their base or have to face unrest at home, that is the worst harm that could possibly happen to a government, because everything that a government does is contingent on having support and a mandate. Secondly, our explanation of how finances are crucial to the operation of the Catalonian independence movement gives you the likelihood analysis the opening opposition lacked to actually show you that there is a legitimate risk that there could be unrest there, actualizing all the harms that they talk about. Thirdly, our case succeeds, though, even if the Gov are successful and they are able to bring these benefits to Catalonia, and it is economically useful for Spain as a whole, because the fact that this is perceived as a massive risk of giving away your finances, of not being able to control your tax revenue at a crucial moment of COVID and crisis in the country, and the fact that anti-Catalonian sentiment is rising up right now, means even if government are able to prove that this is positive for the party itself and for the government itself in terms of its longevity and capacity to implement other policies that will be more important, it is likely to be harmed. Fourthly, we're able to outweigh the economic claims that they get because of this, because if the government is unable to maintain its control over the population and actually have a mandate to support the specific policies it's introducing, it's no use having more finances that you can use if individuals aren't supporting the bills that would redistribute that to the issues the government care about. On opening government, they say firstly that they'll have far more money if they do this. One, note that given that their model is to take the same amount of money as they're already getting, it's unclear how that increases the finances. The way around this is to say, well, you won't have to invest in Catalonia anymore. But this is untrue, because either you still do that, which means that you're just getting less, you're just getting the same amount of money anyway, or for it to be a meaningful amount of money that you could use to solve homelessness or COVID, you would have to pull huge amounts of services out of Catalonia, like completely defunding hospitals, no longer having any police force in the area, for there to be any type of windfall benefit. Obviously, that's a huge harm, because it will be really piss off the Catalonians, because they now have no services but still have to pay into the central government, and that will increase your costs in the long run, because if there's more unrest, you have to do more aggressive types of intervention, or if there's more structural problems being created in Catalonia, it will reach a tipping point where you eventually are forced to pay into that area, meaning that you're unable to actually recoup that information that the opening government talk about. Before I talk about their Catalonian case, I will take a PY from them. Quickly.
Analysis on prosperity also proves stability to the most definite extent, given the context of decades-long financial crisis, making economics the most important thing for Spanish voters. Ops burden is to show people care more about this than the financial gains we get.
Yeah, but what you missed is that the voters on the ground will not see this as a sound economic move because it's not clear that you're actually going to get that windfall benefit. And also it's contingent on the economic succeeding, which just don't make sense because you want to take the same amount of money that you had before, but increase the amount of costs that you're going to have to engage with. Then they say this will likely satisfy Catalonians. I would point out that literally what opening government are standing over is taxation without representation. They want to take money from Catalonia, then require them to raise their own funds to provide their own services and not provide them by the government themselves. I think that is obviously likely to massively enrage individuals before you even enter into our analysis as to how control of finances is specifically how anti-Spain groups within that area leverage power and win over voters. Finally, on closing government, I've noted that the coalition that they talk about isn't likely to exist, and even if it does, it's a much less proximate issue in terms of maintaining power than the specific issue of economics. Finally, they say it will be better on the long term because you can give tax breaks to corporations. One, we've already explained how there's a history of mismanagement of economics within Catalonia. Two, this relies on you actually having money to be able to do that, which Catalonia no longer have. Three, that's less important to the Spanish government and the specific benefits of maintaining their power because they're not able to get that money back from Catalonia because they can no longer receive tax. The most important thing is this political issue that the party cares about. Vote closing opposition.
Okay, thank you everyone for a really good debate, and please leave, and then we will discuss and give you a result in 15 minutes and some feedback.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks everyone for the debate. It was fun.
Thanks. Cheers.